Welcome to the Ricky Mathews Show from the Citizens Bank studio. Hope you're having a great day as we continue to celebrate all the amazing people across the great state of Mississippi who are working in the trenches to make this such a great place to live, work, and play. Hey, we have a great show today, and we'll get to that here in just a second. I wanted to share a quote that I came across in my digital history book. And it really got me thinking about legacy. You know, we talk a lot about living in the moment, and you can't do anything about yesterday. You can only plan for tomorrow. But the one thing that really matters most in our lives is right now, living in this moment. And from time to time, we've had conversations about legacy. You know, what does legacy mean, and what does it mean to leave a legacy? And I've thought a little bit more about that recently. I think as you get older, you think more about those kinds of things. But I had the opportunity to have my wife, Ann, and I had our grandkids, Mila and Liam, over the last few days, while my son, Jordan, and his wife, Sierra, went up to visit my son, Justin, up in New York City. My son, Justin, as regular listeners know, works for Price Waterhouse. And in New York on the international consulting team. And he travels the world. But it's great for Jordan and Justin to be together in New York. But when you're with grandkids, as Ann and I have had the opportunity to do in the last few days, when you're looking at them and seeing the world through their eyes and being able to spend quality time with them, you know, to me, that's defining living in the moment. And so I ran across this quote from Jack Kerouac, and here's what he said. I hope it is true that a man can die and yet not only live in others, but give them life. And not only life, but that great consciousness of life. That's a wonderful thought to have as we think about our legacy. And I think what Jack is saying in that quote is he has this really, I think, a profound belief that we can have an enduring impact on the lives of the people who are around us. And as I say, the more I think about this, and as we get older, certainly as I get older, I'll define my legacy not as a former newspaper publisher or a digital, media CEO, or even this show for that matter. What I have come to realize is that the influence that I have and the memories that I leave, and maybe even the spirit that I leave behind when it's time for me to be dead and gone, will be in the way that that I leave my legacy on my kids and my grandkids. Really, that's what I hope. I think the valuable lessons, hopefully, that I can pass down to them, the uncompromised love that I can share with them, and really show what that example looks like. You know, success to me these days really is a more personal perspective. And so I think, leaving a legacy about the essence of who I am and what I stand for in the hearts and the minds of the family that I leave behind and in my closest friends, and maybe even a stranger or two along the way with acts of kindness. To me, that's what legacy is all about. So when Jack Kerouac said, I hope it is true that a man can die and yet not only live in others, but give them life, and not only life, but give them great consciousness of life. I think that's wonderful to contemplate. So anyway, let's shift gears. Today, I'm really looking forward to having this conversation. Senator Daniel Sparks is going to be joining me for the entire show. He came into the Mississippi legislature not terribly long ago and has made his mark in a very significant way. And we'll tell you a little bit more about, where he comes from and what he's involved with these days in the Senate. We may even get into a few issues or two along the way. But without any further ado, let me welcome my new friend, Daniel Sparks, to the Ricky Mathews Show. Daniel, how you doing, buddy?
I'm doing great. I really appreciate the opportunity to be with you. And, the legacy, the mark that you make that exists long after you're gone, that's what everybody should strive for, because it's
no, man, I can't agree more. I really can't. Look, I was really, one of the things about Mississippi that's so true, and I talk about this a lot on this show, 51% of Mississippians live in rural areas of Mississippi. And so, so goes those rural areas, so goes ultimately the strength of Mississippi. We have to pay attention to the small towns and places like the Mississippi Delta, we have to pay attention to them in order to find success. And I think you being from a small town makes a really important difference, doesn't it? Tell us about where you grew up.
You know, you couldn't be more correct. And I think a lot of times the discussions when they're had in the legislature, whether it's on revenue issues or how we deal with public safety, fire departments, it's so different between a place like Belmont, where I'm from, which is a population of right around 2,000 people, and maybe Biloxi or somewhere in DeSoto County or Jackson or Madison. And the people, you know, are just, they rely on one another. It's such a unique closeness where you know people across, I guess, the entirety of your community because your community's small. But Belmont is where my parents are from, my grandparents from that general area. And, you know, I went to school there from the 1st grade to the 12th grade. Went to Northeast Mississippi Community College. So as a lot of people say, went to 13th grade. I graduated with a whopping 46. And that was a year after we consolidated. It would have been, you know, probably closer to 30. But just a really, really good place to live. And still today, you know, to go down to the ball field. The other night was homecoming. And somebody put together a great idea to invite the homecoming queen, since we've been doing it since 1961. And out of that grouping, we had around 40 of them that actually came back and walked the field again. So it's little things like that. And as they walked across the field, history walked across the field, because when the queens from the 80s and the 90s particularly walked across the field, I'm like, I know every one of those people. And, you know, you just grew up together. But it's a wonderful little place in the world in that northeast corner of Tishomingo County.
It really is. Listen, I love the small towns of Mississippi and really can't get enough of it. And, you know, it doesn't matter if you're in a big city like Biloxi or Gulfport or Jackson, or whether it's in a small town like Belmont. There's a similar sort of, I don't know, core value about Mississippians that, and we've learned it obviously from great floods and big tornadoes and huge hurricanes, and you know the story well. But in those moments, all the politics kind of go to the wayside, and what you really find in the essence of who we are is something really special. And you know that to be a fact, don't you?
Yes, absolutely. And I've told this story before, and Senator Mike Thompson will probably appreciate me telling the story. He does a better job with it than I do. But Mike and I had a lot of strong discussions about the rural fire truck program and helping me understand the wind pool and how all that works together. And of course, you know, Northeast Mississippi needs fire trucks, and the coast needs to be concerned about coastal storms and the wind pool. Well, Mike came up as vice chairman and now chairman of Ports and Marine Resources. And I had stressed the volunteer nature of our fire departments. And Mike and I were headed to Yellow Creek Port for a visit. He was behind me in his car, I think on the phone with a federal judge trying to do a little telephonic hearing, when an accident literally occurred in front of us, a car accident. We pulled over, rendered aid, rendered assistance. Fortunately, everybody was okay, but it was a pretty severe lick. And as we're trying to get the person out of the car, a fire breaks out in the car. We're trying to extinguish it. Mike flags down a truck, pulls, the fire extinguisher off the truck. But the interesting thing was, about that time, a pickup pulls up and two guys, probably in their 50s, come running over to the car. T-shirt, shorts, flip-flops, had the jaws of life, get the guy out. We're walking back across the street, sort of sweating and, concerned, going on to our meeting. And as we're crossing the street, Mike says, Daniel did not miss the opportunity to look at me and say, and that's why we need money for rural fire trucks in Northeast Mississippi. He loves telling that story.
So many lessons. There are some. There's some senators who do their best, but some don't go into the depths of the complexities of the state and what it takes to run a state. I mean, that's just a fact. And there are some that do their homework and get into the complexities of what it takes to run a state. And in a place like, I don't care which state you're in, it's going to be complex. Mississippi is it's very complex, and there are a lot of nuances to understanding that. And the more we learn about it, and that example is a great example, actually. The more we learn about it, the more we learn how much we don't know. It's like the layers of an onion. As you peel it back, you see more layers and more understanding. And I had a conversation with Delbert Hoseman, and he said of you, made a note of it. He said that you're very bright and that you're a hard worker, and that he went on to say that I won't have any trouble having a conversation with you because you've really done your homework. When we come back on the other side, we're going to talk a little bit about the complexities of Mississippi and what's it like when you get into something like taxes and restructuring that and other complicated conversations like that. We'll see you after this break. Hey, welcome back to the Ricky Mathews Show as we continue our conversation with Senator Daniel Sparks, somebody I've been really looking forward to getting to know better. One of the neat things, Daniel, about doing this show is it gives me a chance to kind of dig and learn about people like you. I want to know what makes you tick. I think being from Belmont, as you pointed out just a few minutes ago, gives you a unique perspective. And there are a lot of small towns in a state like Mississippi. If I read this correctly, your mother was a third grade teacher, is that right? And your dad a preacher? Did I read that right?
That's correct. Yes.
So tell me about that. So that's an interesting mix. It seems that they probably had a huge influence on you early in your life.
Oh, absolutely. My dad preached. We lived in Cleveland. I was actually born in Cleveland because he was preaching over in Cleveland, Mississippi at that time. And then we had a chance to move back closer to home into Northwest Alabama for about 6 years. But then I started, as I said earlier, the first grade there in Belmont. And my grandfather on both sides, maternal and paternal, were preachers in that area. So I tell people all the time, when I do not do right, it's not because I wasn't taught better. So then my mom, she was at home with my brother. I have one sibling, my brother and I. And then she went back to school when we got up kind of third, fourth grade and finished her undergraduate. And she taught then for 27 and a half years in the third grade. So very involved parents. We both, my brother and I both played sports, and whatever we were engaged in, my parents were committed to. And then there were standards, and I'm proud of that. And sometimes maybe those standards at the time I might not have understood, but as I grew older, I've learned to love and appreciate and respect the way that we were brought up. Even more so. And, that's something that I do feel like it's beyond politics and policy until we are more focused and have a better job with our nuclear families and the communities that surround them, because those strong families, and I will say this for the school area, and this is true of, Boonville and Iuka and Fulton and the town Manatee, all these places that I represent. When you go to their sporting events or a spelling bee, it doesn't matter what it is. The community is there, parents, grandparents, and you have a sense of belonging. But you also have a sense of responsibility and accountability. And, in what I do, I want to do right for right's sake, but I also don't want to embarrass my name, my family, my community, my hometown, because they've been so influential. We're all human, but on the other hand, if we are accountable to one another in that small environment, I think it makes us better.
It's and you learn about values, and you learn about dogged determination and setting goals and being accountable and living life in that way. I had the opportunity. I was in pre-med for a period of time and went to paramedic school, became an advanced paramedic, and then was in pre-med. And along the way, I decided that wasn't really for me, and came back and worked for Mississippi Power Company and started to kind of rebuild an education aside from pre-med, and went on to get an MBA at Southern Miss. But along the way, though, I went to Mississippi Gulf Coast Community College, and I have a strong belief in the community college system in Mississippi. I think it's one of the strongest in the nation. Start looking at some, what they're doing to listen to stakeholders and focus on things like job, workforce training, et cetera. Over 50% of the students at Mississippi Gulf Coast Community College today are involved in non-traditional education, and we'll talk more about that as we get into that. But you're also a student of Northeast Mississippi Community College, and I was trying to piece together something. I read something about you, and then I saw sort of the end of it. Obviously, you went on to get a master's in taxation, and you went on to be a lawyer, but it seemed like there was a gap somewhere, and I think you worked in the grocery business or something like that. And like me, this kind of recalibrating what you wanted to be when you grew up was actually an important time in your life, wasn't it?
It really was, and I did go to Northeast straight out of high school and was there for actually 5 semesters because I walked on the second year to play football and wanted that second season. So when I was leaving Northeast, I had all the hours really I could gather, and it was a great educational experience. But I had worked with a gentleman there locally in Belmont who was in the wholesale grocery business. It was closeout, salvage, discontinues. It was not the main grocery line. And I kid the Manufacturers Association all the time. I said, we survived when your members miscalculated, when there was a mistake. And, you learned about things like market penetration, test market items, things that you would see. You also, and you've heard a lot lately about shrinkflation. I remember when Tide washing powder went from a 44 use powder in the box to a 42 use to a 40 use. And they never changed the price because that way you walk in, you were a little bit fooled that they're not going up on price, but the quantity was falling. So, that gave me, in my opinion, a great education in logistics, in how we create products, how we try to penetrate markets and pick up market share. I mean, there were so many stories that I could tell that were interesting in that endeavor. We dealt with storms, we dealt with closeouts, we dealt with insurance claims. I mean, it was a good education. And when I went back to school at University of Mississippi, I was about 26, 27 when I walked back on campus. So that gives me a little bit of appreciation for what we're trying to ask some of our Mississippians to do, to be upskilled, to go back and maybe, industry in their area has changed. But I did my undergrad in economics and had a minor in accounting. Well, the accounting school at Ole Miss, and God bless them back then for recruiting me over to get an accounting degree as well, because they've been a top 10 program now for years. But I did a double major in accounting and economics, and then did the master's in tax and went on to law school. And so many conversations that I have with clients and now maybe constituents or colleagues, having an understanding of that work environment of, transportation, shipping, manufacturing, and then cobbling that together with, the economic education or the accounting side, the law side. I hope it makes me good for my clients. I hope it makes me effective for my constituents and ultimately for the state, because as you were stating so well earlier, if I don't go visit the coast, I don't understand it. Didn't grow up there. If I don't go spend time in the Delta, I don't understand it. So if I can see it, visualize it, listen to someone tell me what their strengths and weaknesses are, then together we hopefully can find solutions that are effective regionally and statewide.
So this is not a tax question, because we'll get into that in a second. But what's interesting about your experience in the grocery business is that when today you talk about the grocery tax and how it's going to impact people and whether it's a regressive tax and all of that, you can literally pull from that experience. You can pull from it and say, well, it doesn't impact the poor the way that some people say it does, and here's the reason why. But when you would know that intellectually anyway, but I'm just saying that when you can draw from that experience, it makes a huge difference, doesn't it?
It really does. And, we oftentimes, there's something that's politically advantageous. I won't say it's a hollow victory, but it does not have the impact we think it does. If we had cut the sales tax on groceries, because, as you know, we don't have a grocery tax. That falls under our general sales tax provision. But the inflation, the true inflation, the rise of the cost of goods, the 7% we removed would have not been felt, 18 months later, 24 months later. So as we, contemplate those things, it's the price of groceries, it's the cost of groceries that's hurting Mississippi families more so than the sales tax on those increases. And as I think you were alluding to as well, many people don't realize this, but if someone is on supplemental nutrition assistance, which is SNAP, they're not paying grocery tax. So the poorest of the poor among us are not paying that grocery tax and would feel no effect from the elimination or reduction thereof of a tax on groceries.
Yeah, so like I said, it wasn't necessarily a tax question specifically, but just it's interesting how, your education and taxation, your time now as a senator, your work is becoming a lawyer, how the grocery experience kind of melds into the current conversations. And what's interesting too is that to have done that early in your life and to have sort of developed that foundation, I think it actually provided you a great foundation for when you decided to start your own law firm. Because you think about it. Whether you're talking about running a grocery business or whether you're talking about starting a law firm, that's entrepreneurship. That's you got to be willing to go all in to make something like that successful, don't you?
You really do. And of course, when I graduated from law school, it was 2008. So it was the worst time in America to come out. But you find a niche, you find a place where you believe you can make impact. And that's true in your business as well as hopefully your legislative career.
Wow. So interesting. Listen, we'll continue our conversation with Senator Daniel Sparks when we come back from this break. We'll see you after this. Welcome back to the Ricky Mathews Show. We're having a deep conversation with Senator Daniel Sparks and getting to know him better. And we'll shift gears now. We talked about kind of his life in Belmont growing up and going to community college and working in the grocery business for a while, going on to Ole Miss and, developing a really terrific foundation educationally, obviously becoming a lawyer, starting his own law firm. And along the way, you got interested in politics. When did that happen?
I would say, and I think there's a story my parents tell, that I might have been known to crawl out of the bed after I was put to bed to try to watch the news underneath the couch. I think I was always intrigued. My first memories of political atmosphere was the 1980 race. And of course, with President Reagan kind of coming on the scene, coming from a background of preachers and the orator that President Reagan was, the great communicator we refer to him as. And I think it's the great motivator, if you will. Sometimes those of us, particularly who come from a background in the church, we go to church to be uplifted, to be edified, sometimes to be scolded, to have our toes stepped on. I think sometimes we forget that part of it. And that's one of the things, that's the way that I see your role, is just if you can communicate back to your people. As we went through the first year I was in the legislature, which was the COVID year, so much information, so much misinformation. Part of the job, I believe, there was no vote when we were out of session, when we were back and forth that year. But man, if you could bring some information home to help your businesses who were being forced to be closed or uncertain about the future, I think that was a great opportunity right at the beginning of the time in the legislature to communicate with people. And I draw back on, I remember those charts and graphs that President Reagan would set up on the table as he's giving a speech to the nation, talking about the number of, interballistic missiles that the Soviet Union had. So I think that people who elect you, they want you to vote in a manner that's consistent with the values and views of your district. But I think the bigger piece sometimes is to communicate back to them opportunities, difficulties, and help them to weave their way through a complex life, because they have their own family issues going on, their own job issues going on. And one of the biggest things we dealt with was the Department of Employment Services, because so many people were being laid off. And I had people contacting me that had worked every day they were eligible in their life, had never looked for assistance, but were really in a tough spot. And I honestly used Facebook videos to post and then boost that would explain what was going on over at the Department of Employment Security And when I put up a 12 to 14-minute video about unemployment benefits and you have 30,000 views, people are concerned and needing that guidance.
Listen, if I look at your experience while in the Senate, and really just a few years, it's amazing that you've compiled this kind of experience already. But you've in just in terms of committee assignments or leadership, and this is not a complete list, but you've had corrections experience, drug policy, economic and workforce development, finance, forestry, judiciary, universities and colleges, wildlife, fisheries, and parks, and the list goes on. And when we say complex, it really is. Mississippi's complex, man. Again, it's like the layers of an onion. I'm curious, take a step back from all of that experience you've gotten now. When you sit in the quietness of your own thoughts these days, how do you think about being a senator? How do you think about your role as a senator? How do you think about bringing clarity to the communications that you just talked about? How do you think about it?
Well, first of all, I think I'm very fortunate to have this job, and the people in Tishomingo, Prentiss, and Itawamba County who said, let this guy go down there, let him speak for us, let him come back and communicate to us. That's a privilege and an honor that every time you walk in this building, which is a beautiful Capitol building, it's where I am today, actually. I don't let the gravity of that be lost. And I think that helps keep you grounded, is just understanding who you represent and the honor it is to represent them. Even if a vote doesn't go the way that, a particular faction that may have supported you wanted it to go. So, to me, it's trying to learn the process, and it is a little bit, the practice of law does help, because there's so much procedure that goes into a bill becoming a law and going to committee and getting out of the committee on our end, and then having to have built relationships. And sometimes we forget this. If I pass a bill out of the Senate, I don't have half a bill. I have to go down to the House and make sure that it's understood and supported and it comes back out. So learning the process was, I think, the first thing. And that's why, maybe this year and looking forward to next year, having grasped a little better the process, it feels good. You hear a lot of times people say when a quarterback moves up to the next level, he doesn't see the field as well. Hopefully after 4 or 5 sessions, you're beginning to see the field and understand where to focus your energies. But you do learn what you believe you can accomplish, and also how to partner things together, knowing that you can go to your local municipal leaders and say, here's a possibility. You've asked me about this program. What can you do in this arena that we can cobble together with the state, and then maybe the federal side with ARC, the Appalachian Region Commission, which comes down into our district, different groups like that. So you learn to be more effective at helping your people put things together. And it takes a little experience to do that, because when I got here, I was so excited, and you're so energized and you want to do good. And sometimes you don't know how to accomplish it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a humbling process for sure. Listen, I've had terrific conversation with Speaker Jason White about his approach, and you just spoke to it, but I'll just say it the way he says it, and you can add what you want to it. But one of the things he says is, it's hard to be mad at somebody that that it pays to develop relationships, whether it's across the aisle or not. That we need to listen to each other, and sometimes we don't do enough of that. Do you agree?
Oh, I agree. And the speaker has been very gracious to me. I've had a lot of personal conversations with him on issues that are very important to the House, that maybe I or some of my colleagues in the Senate or leadership sees a little differently. And often we're trying to get to the same place. We just believe there may be a better route to travel. And it may be that some people are a little more conservative in their approach to a social issue. They may be a little bit more conservative to the approach to a revenue-driven issue. But I would say, by and large, the majority of people that are down here for the right reasons. They're trying to invest their time and efforts into making things happen. But I wholeheartedly agree that if you will go spend time, break bread, talk to them, ask them what's important to them, once you begin to learn what makes their passion for their region, for their district, or for that particular issue, you can at least communicate with them in an effective fashion. And while sometimes we may see sparring matches on the floor or in the media, there are a lot of conversations that are had between members that may be testy, it may be heated, but we do it privately in a manner to not inflame, but to try to maybe build a bridge across an issue to get to a conclusion.
Yeah, so important. My conversation with Haley Barber, gosh, he has so much insight about that when he makes observations or shares observations that he was able to make when he worked in the Reagan White House about Reagan and Tip O'Neill coming together at the end of the day and having a drink together. And while they disagreed on a lot of issues, they liked each other personally. And he said that one of the problems in Washington today is that people, as soon as the session's over or during the week, they're going back home really rapidly, as opposed to staying in Washington and getting to know each other and having that quality time with one another. And he thinks that contributes to the polarizing world that we're in today. But a lot of times people want to put that polarizing template on top of the Mississippi legislature. But in fact, if you look at the bills that are passed, I would say a vast majority of the bills that are passed have bipartisan support, that there actually is a spirit of working together. Now, we only hear about the polarizing issues, but often there's a tremendous effort, as Tip O'Neill and Reagan did, for you guys to come together and talk about the issues in the way that you're talking about. That's actually very real, isn't it?
It is, and I think that when you look at the revenue side of the equation, you have a certain amount of money to cover the needs of the state of Mississippi, and there's always a desire for more. I guess if I made more, I would spend more, but that's something when you make those decisions, you're trying to do it in a manner that's best for the state.
There's no doubt about that. Hey, listen, when we come back, we'll kind of wind it up and just talk about some of the big issues that are facing Mississippi. This is not intended to be more of a policy, legislative type of conversation, more about just getting to know Daniel Sparks better. But when we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Senator Sparks. We'll see you after this. Welcome back to the Ricky Mathews Show. We're having a terrific conversation today with Senator Daniel Sparks, getting to know him better. He's on SuperTalk a lot, but it's usually around the issues. And today's really about getting to know him better. So it's been a wonderful 3 segments that we've had with him. But in the last segment, there is literally no way to cover the complex issues that are facing Mississippi today. I mean, if I sat down and started thinking about all of the conversations that are happening in our state about what the tax structure ought to be. I think about roads and highways and education funding. I mean, MDOT funding specifically, the antiquated approach that we're using today and how we might go about changing that. All the conversations that are happening about labor participation and why that's so important. The role the community college system plays in that, in fact, the state retirement program. And we know that if we don't get focused on that, certainly we started that process last year, but there's so much more to do, or we're gonna fall terribly short in the future. I mean, the projections on that are incredible. I mean, the list really goes on and on. It is super complex. I mean, there's a lot to do, isn't there, Daniel?
There really is. And, one of the things the lieutenant governor did this year, and I'm fortunate enough to be on the committee, is the Fiscal Policy Committee, chaired by Chairman Briggs Hobson and Josh Harkins on the finance and appropriations side. And I think we're trying to look at the big picture. What are your revenue sources? What is your tax credit program? People forget that tax credits are a dollar for dollar reduction. It's as if you appropriated a dollar. Then what about your tax structure? Ongoing tax cuts that are yet to be implemented, income tax, corporate tax, what, if anything, to do with the tax on food, on groceries, the funding mechanism for transportation, and it is antiquated. And, I trying not to be critical, but one of the things you said about legacy earlier is I don't want to have a piece of legislation or an idea and policy that I push that 25 years from now, someone who sits in the seat I currently occupy suffers, or the state suffers, because of a bad policy decision. And there were some bad policy decisions made, in particular relationship to the retirement system 25 years ago, right in the middle of a heated gubernatorial race. And the time bomb, if you will, that they left is under our feet. And so I can complain about it, or we can dig in and try to fix it. So that's what we're trying to do. But, you mentioned entrepreneurial nature of whether it's a law firm or a grocery store. One of the key focuses I think we want to have going forward are high wage, high demand, priority sector education through Accelerate that we started up about 5 years ago. Our community colleges are the partners there. I think you mentioned it earlier that a lot of people are not on what's called the four-year college track. But we're taking business opportunities through our career coaches that we've put in the high schools, where people don't just graduate high school and matriculate to a job. They're actually seeing things as juniors and seniors. I mean, you've got, obviously, Ingalls is the, I think, largest private employer in the state of Mississippi, and they would hire and hire and hire. We've got to train what industry needs. And so my challenge to the education community has been, don't train what you think we need. Ask industry what they need, and let's look forward. And I think we're doing a better job with that. And we're looking at it from region to region because, Belmont, Mississippi is 3.5 hours from Jackson. We're a long way away. We've got a great manufacturing base, a lot of good things going on up there. But what's happening there versus the growth in DeSoto County versus what's going on the coast and in the Delta region, the Jackson region, it's all different. And we're trying to focus on them by ecosystems or by regions to make sure that the complexities that you've mentioned are being taken into consideration.
Yeah, one of the things, you look across the state, and there are economic engines in this state, maybe 3 or 4 significant economic engines, obviously one of them being the coast with, as you pointed out, Ingalls, and then, of course, Chevron and the ancillary manufacturing and businesses that surround them on one end as a bookend, and on the other end of the coast, you've got Stennis Space Center and the blue chip industries that are there. It's easy to take that for granted because it's kind of out of sight, out of mind. And then the hospitality sector and tourism and gaming and all of that adds up. It's an important economic engine. So when a hurricane hits coastal Mississippi, it knocks the entire state to its knees. This is not just a coast event. I think about the Golden Triangle link and the work that they're doing in the Golden Triangle to Joe Mack said that a $1 billion industry is kind of small potatoes anymore. I mean, we're talking about multi-billion-dollar development. And then you think about Madison and what's happening there with high tech sector. It is, there's one thing for sure, and that is that Governor Tate Reeves, and you look at the macro and the micro numbers that are coming out of his administration, his time serving as governor, there is no debating the reality. If you're talking about a legacy, his is an economic development legacy, and that's where a lot of our focus has to be. I mean, that's the quickest way to lift all boats, isn't it?
It really is, and that's something that they've done a wonderful job in taking care of site development, doing the hard work that you don't see before a ribbon is cut, and we've got to continue to do that and do it all across the state.
Well, listen, we'll continue our conversations in the future. I look forward to staying in touch with you, and maybe in a future show we'll really dive into the tax conversation, because it's one that it's easy to minimize, but it is super complex. And there's some, you're talking about making decisions today that are going to affect us 25 years from now. That's one of them. Anyway, Senator Daniel Sparks, it's been a pleasure to get to know you, my friend.
Same here. Thank you so much for having me on, Ricky.
Yeah, you bet. You bet. Listen, have a great day, and we'll see you tomorrow.